All right. Looks like all our speakers are here. So we are back again in action. Ladies and gentlemen, let's move on with our next panel discussion, the evolution of data-driven nations race to attain AI supremacy. Now, data is the fuel of the nations. And the Economist said, in quote, whether you're going for a run, watching TV, or even just sitting in traffic, virtually every activity creates a data trace, more raw material for the data distilleries. Closing the quote. Now, algorithms trained by all these data traces will be globally transformational. It's possible that a new world order will emerge from it, along with a new GDP or gross data product that captures an emerging measure of wealth and power of nations. Now, it is time we identified that what the field will look like, that new competitive and collaborative opportunities develop. While they develop, the panel will discuss the elements around nations building AI supremacy and India's quest amongst all to become premier destination for AI. Welcome it is to our second panel discussion session of the day on the topic evolution of data-driven nations race to attain AI supremacy. And the speakers to come one after another are surely fire-packed themselves. Let me introduce to you the speakers one after another. The first speaker here is the Director, Analytics and Data Sciences, VMware India, Ranjani Mani. Now, Ranjani Mani leads a global team of data scientists and analytics managers across 4 geographies and engage with leadership teams across PM, engineering, IT, technical, and C-suite executives to solve business problems for customer experience and success organizations, CXS at VMware India. She has set up large data science teams, product management, consulting, and analytics with stints across high-tech companies such as Dell, Oracle, and VMware India. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together and welcome Ranjani Mani. And the next speaker is the global analytics leader, Pars Amazon, Jayati De. Now, Jayati comes with progressive and solid 16 years of professional experience with core expertise in analytics of retail banking products and having worked in senior leadership positions at Citi, Fidelity, and Standard Chartered Bank. And at Amazon, Jayati leads the data analytics and tactical tool development requirements for the global compliance operations to keep the catalog safe. And through her multiple corporate stints, Jayati has pursued business analytics program from ISB and MS from BITS. So please put your hands together and welcome the second speaker, Jayati De. And the third speaker is the Global Director, AI Consulting Partners, Nvidia, Sundar Ramalingam. Now, Sundar is responsible for managing the deep learning business ecosystem for Nvidia in India. He has a strong technical background, and his areas of interest include deep learning, big data analytics, IoT, and automotive solutions. Now, Sundar has also more than 20 years of experience in solutions involving visual computing, virtualization, and high-performance computing. So please welcome our third speaker, Sundar Ramalingam. And the fourth speaker is Anshuma Dogra Singh, Deputy Director, Applied Materials. Now, Anshuma is a technology-driven and a positive leader with 17 plus years of work experience. She has led various portfolios in software product development, program management, IT infrastructure solutions and delivery. And she is currently leading the IT authentication and security in Applied Materials India. Anshuma is also the people leader for Software Development Accelerator, which focuses on adoption of latest technologies, excellence in software development practices, and upskilling or reskilling of workforce. And that brings us to the fourth speaker, Anshuma Dogra Singh. And this fire-packed panel couldn't have been moderated by anybody else than TV, as he's popularly known, Tathagat Verma, Head Strategy and Operations, Walmart Global Tech India. Now, TV, more popularly known as TV, but Tathagat Verma is the Head of Strategy and Operations at Walmart Global Tech India and is also pursuing his executive PhD from the Indian School of Business. In a career spanning 3 decades, he started as a computer scientist with the Defense R&D, which is the DRDO, and subsequently moved to software product industry, where he has led in technical and leadership roles in high-tech domains at companies including Siemens, Telecom, Philips Healthcare, Huawei, McAfee, Yahoo, 24/7 Innovation Labs, etc. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is our moderator, Tathagat Verma, or TV. Now, members of the panel, please remember you will be played an alert 3 minutes before the end of your session. That is if you don't yourself track the time. And also, please quickly conclude when you hear the alert, because in the interest of time and due to paucity, we'll have to just go ahead and end the sessions on time today. All right. So over to you, Tathagat Verma, or TV.
Thank you, Riaz, for a very gracious introduction to the panel and for all of us. You are raising the bar every time with every passing session. So I am really scared and want to really make sure that we all are able to keep pace with that. I'm really honored by the esteemed panel this afternoon, and I hope that we'll be able to add to some of the conversations that we have seen in the last couple of hours. I think it's been a great start to discussing some of the items on the table, and we want to add to the whole idea about how various nations or how different countries are really looking at the various adoption in the race to AI supremacy. Now, just to set a quick context on that, we have seen in the last three industrial revolutions. The first one I like to call it as the mechanical industrialization or the mechanical revolution. The second one being the scale industrialization, because we really went for the whole economies of scale and the mass production. And the third one being really all kind of technology driven, whether it was the electronics or the computers. And the fourth one is really heading towards the cognitive industrial revolution or the fourth industrial revolution. And I think the biggest difference here is, as I like to see, is that this is probably going to be the first $1 trillion economy that would not be relying on natural resources or on the capital resources, and which is a very dramatic shift from how we have seen it. But then we also see the risk, as we have seen in the earlier industrial revolutions, that the future is already here. It's just spread out. It's not here at the same time. The same challenges happen when we have seen the first few revolutions, that the future did not arrive everywhere at the same time. Some countries lagged behind on that. Now, the question before this panel is, how do we see with the artificial intelligence? Are we seeing the future is really going to be spread out simultaneously across a single timeline, or we are really going to see multiple timelines happening there? And this is interesting. And just to share some of the data points here, because when I look at some of the data, for example, on the papers published in artificial intelligence publications, the data says that, for example, it grew 35% faster than the previous year in 2019, which itself was 18% faster. So in the last 2 years, we have seen almost 50+% of growth happening there. Now, it sounds very impressive in the way things are happening until you start to kind of tease it out that the future is not happening at the same time across all the nations. For example, China is leading the whole paper publication at this point in time, followed by US. If you look at the patent, in fact, 2.9% of all the patent filings across all categories are coming from artificial intelligence. And there, China is actually claiming 65% of the patent requests or the patent applications, and US is at 20% there. If you look at the publications, for example, they follow another trend. In the US, for example, 19% of the papers are coming from the corporate, whereas in China and European Union, 15 and 17% of them are coming from the government. So there are different use cases. As one of my fellow panelists said in a briefing call we had earlier, that every nation has a use case for artificial intelligence. And in fact, that is one of the things that we want to talk about today. Just to quote one or two more things here, which might be relevant for the panel before we get to listening their views. When it comes to jobs and hiring, when I was looking at the Stanford 2021 AI Index report, it's very interesting that actually, for example, if you look at the AI hiring index, Brazil is leading actually the pack at 3.4 AI index, and then followed by India. And in fact, China is very low at 1.3. Now, this is culled out from LinkedIn data. It's quite possible that LinkedIn is not the predominant form of job postings in China. So that could be a reason, because it doesn't seem to be commensurate to rest of the indicators. But if you look at the AI skill penetration, it is actually that India, which is really leading the pack at 2.83, which is the average share of AI skills, with US and China following it. But when you look at the private investment, we are nowhere there. We are at the number 8 at this point in time at just under $1 billion, whereas China is 10 times bigger at $10 billion and US is 23 billion and leading the pack there. The last point, very interestingly, which I think will make for a very interesting conversation as well, which seems to be a perennial challenge when we look at the participation of women in technology. It seems like the women in AI, actually, India is leading the pack, at least based on the Stanford AI Index, where it says that India is actually not only number one, it is actually having more women in AI than men. And actually, the countries like US and China are actually on the other side of the divide there. So the question that I want to really start out with, are we at the danger of really looking at a cognitive divide, whether it is across nations or across different kind of slice and dice that we do there? And to set the ball rolling, I want to really ask one question, and I'll go in a rotation with my fellow panelists, which is like, how do you really look at the current landscape of adoption of AI across the nations? Are we seeing any specific trends that stand out to you? For example, it might be ESG, as we saw Pankaj talking about it, or it could be governance or healthcare or education. What is it that stands out to you? So let's start with you, Ranjini, if you could go first, please.
Sure, yeah. No, great introduction, TV, right? So I'll try to address this from the perspective of what is same and different across countries, right? And how nations are approaching this. So I think, as you rightly called out, what is common is this growing need of AI significance, including the ability to provide a competitive advantage, right? But in AI, execution is critical. So some in terms of adoption, I think what's different is the varying levels of maturity across countries, right? Some adopt it more vigorously than others. I think there was this Deloitte report which called out around how 80% of the organizations in Australia believe that it's critical versus Canada, right? Which is way more cautious in taking AI risks. And I think most of us over here know that the Chinese government, I think, has declared its ambition for China to become this world-leading AI innovator by 2030. So I think more than a use case-based approach, most of the forerunners, they have thought through and have national AI frameworks, right, which potentially account for end-to-end, like from data to regulations, infrastructure, to use cases that are relevant to them, right? And this is across US to China, Germany, and Canada. In fact, I think India in itself is going to be launching its national AI program soon. So the use cases could be specific to the nation's issues, right? I recall reading this somewhere that outbreaks are inevitable, but pandemics are optional. So think about how much a country such as India could benefit from empowering its last mile health workers by predicting epidemics, disease control, or even disaster management. So what I think beyond all of this is very nascent, though, related to the previous session, which Pankaj spoke about, is not what we design, but how we do this and how that will define the future of AI, right? So if you think about it, Deep Blue didn't really win by being smarter than a human. It won because it was millions of times faster than a human. And intelligence isn't behavior alone, right? I can do nothing, sit here and still be intelligent. So, and Jeff Hawkins writes about this in his book called Thousand Brains, that even before we try to build intelligent machines, a good question is, do we understand what truly is intelligence? And I'll leave you with that.
No, that's really a very loaded question, and hope to come back on that one, Ranjini. Jayati, would you like to go next?
Sure, let me go next. And thank you so much. I think while we're sort of talking about it, we are definitely seeing that the US and the China are pervasive, at least in terms of, how we factor in important things like talent, the number of research, and the adoption, especially the VC funding, right? That's what you touched upon, TV. In fact, the government of China has declared to become the AI leader by 2030, right? And China today has one of the most valuable startups called SenseTime, which has raised around 1.2 billion, and it's rumored to sort of get another additional 1 billion in the day, right? But regardless of where the countries are in terms of their AI maturity level, I think we can learn from all approaches, right? And there is many paths to AI excellence, and success is not that the winner takes it all, right? And there are different countries that are looking at different use cases. For example, Japan has always been a long-standing leader in the AI industry, and they actually introduced this concept of 3D robots, what we call as cobots, right? South Korea, right? The government has large-scale funding planned for medicine, national defense, public safety. In fact, some of these large-scale engineering companies like Hyundai, Samsung, LGs, they are pushing the boundaries on engineering. And for all the BTS fans who are there in the audience today, you would know about the fact that Hyundai acquired Boston robotics, and they launched through a BTS sort of campaign, right? So, and other countries, right? Because UK knows that it cannot compete on the VC funding part, so they are positioning themselves as the world leader for ethical AI standards. Europe, Germany, all of these countries are looking at driverless cars, health, transportation, Russia, national security. So I think there is not, while there is a sort of dominance in countries like China as well as US, all countries are at a different maturity level, and everyone's solving a use case that's sort of closer to them and what unlocks their economic as well as social needs. So I'll stop at that, TV.
Thanks, Jayati. No, I think this is wonderful, and I think you gave a very broad brush of really how different countries are doing, and I think that's a very relevant point because there cannot be one size fit all approach. With that, I want to go to Sundar here and really talk about Nvidia is in the business of making GPUs, and sometimes we don't get to see what's really under the hood there. And it's also a very capex intensive activity, both to produce a chip and also to even build giant data centers and kind of monetize them. What are your point of view from where you are seeing the 360-degree view? What are the things that emerge to you, Sundar?
Absolutely. Thank you, TV. Thanks for the introduction, and very happy to be part of this panel. All right. So I would like to bring quite a different perspective to this particular question, TV. Now, when we're talking about how mature each nation is, and is there a divide in terms of the maturity levels? So when it comes to maturity, we could look at it from multiple lenses. The first lens is innovators, researchers. Where does the story come from? Where do new research comes from? Etc. etc. So obviously we all know, stating the very obvious thing, China and Canada and the US stand apart in that. But then how about India? See, what I am noticing, particularly over the past 4 to 5 years, is that we are leading the pack when it comes to adopting the technology and developing for the world. That's amazing. I don't think there is any need for us to even think that, hey, these guys are far ahead of us. They are far ahead of us in one perspective, in terms of research, in terms of bringing out new innovative products, in terms of trying out things which have never been done before. Everything is fine. That's great, and that is needed for the growth of any technology. But who uses it? Who adopts it? Who develops that particular technology into an usable one, which can be adopted by others? And that is where India really stands apart from everybody else. Look at this panel. It's comprising of Walmart and VMware and Amazon and Applied Materials and Nvidia. And this entire panel consists of leaders who manage global teams from the US, from China, from Canada, where developers report into these people, and these people set the stage, set the path for those developers to develop stuff which is getting used by the entire globe. So in terms of maturity, I think we need to be very, very clear that there are multiple lenses through which we can measure maturity. And as I said earlier, research and innovation happens with one set of people, and adoption very, very clearly happens from countries like India, and India leading the pack. There is absolutely no doubt about it. Now, the second thing is, so if this is the divide between countries, what is the common thread that connects all of them? Whether it is researchers and innovators, or whether it is adopters like India, leading adopters like India. The common thread that connects amongst them is technology, right? In terms of technology, I really don't think there is any big divide, right? Technology has matured tremendously over the past 4 years. Particularly past couple of years have been very, very interesting in multiple aspects. Be in terms of using newer technologies practically, like deep learning. Deep learning has been there for decades, but then using it practically to solve practical problems, deploying it for practical purposes. Yes, it is a technology that cuts across all nations. Then, making use of data in the most intelligent way. Data engineering has evolved so much in the recent past. When I say recent past, a couple of years, not like 5 years or 10 years or whatever. Data engineering, which used to consume 70%, 80% of every analyst's job, has come down drastically, has improved drastically. Using very, very complex models, using newer methodologies of solving problems, machine learning problems, deep learning problems, using an ensemble of models. People are never happy nowadays with using 1 or 2 models, using ensemble of models to arrive at more accurate results at a much faster rate. using the latest computational power, particularly from GPUs, as you rightly pointed out, TV, etc., etc. These are technologies that cut across nations, irrespective of their maturity level and irrespective of whether they are in the innovation and research stage or whether they are in the adoption stage. So this, I would say, is the common connecting thread between all these countries. And now the last point, very quickly I complete, is GPUs. I mean, you mentioned about it. GPUs are becoming much more affordable, and for solving large problems, I mean, GPUs is sort of getting there. So it becomes the de facto standard for computation, and certainly the affordability is increasing day by day.
Thanks, Chandra. I think you bring some very interesting perspectives that technology has become a common denominator, and it is as ubiquitous as oxygen and sunshine, and it's available to everybody in equal proportion. That's not really, boundaries cannot stop it. Research and innovation might be another thing, but from adoption point of view, you think while India may not be doing so good in research and innovation, but then adoption is really definitely India is doing good. And we'll deep dive on that. I want to come to my fourth panelist, Anshuma. From applied materials point of view, you guys do some really core research, for example, and really build some of the stuff that really end of the day powers the chips and the entire infrastructure that keeps it going there. What would be your perspective on this, Anshuma? Okay, we cannot hear you, Anshuma. No, it's not coming.
I'm audible?
Yes, now, yes, please go ahead.
Oh, just turned off my speaker. So thanks, TV. Yeah, from the semiconductor equipment manufacturing space, I think there is one perspective that I would really like to share. We've spoken about the adoption of AI, about the research and other aspects, but the high computing power, that is the basis which really enables AI. And with the pandemic coming in and the global chip shortage, which really struck us, and our automotive industry really faced that, the huge realization was that the silicon supply chain is very critical for nations. And because of that, you would see a major trend shift in the semiconductor manufacturing. So we see that with this whole chip shortage happening, with the geopolitical situation that we are in, a lot of manufacturing is moving back to US. So Intel is opening a fab in US, Samsung is opening a fab. And surprisingly, TSMC, which is the largest market share, which is around 55%, instead of building a new fab in Taiwan, it is also moving its fab to US, which shows that the focus of the nations is towards AI nationalism, towards getting all the compute into their own hands. So that is one major shift that we are seeing from our space. The other thing that we are also seeing, is the focus on cybersecurity, which is there in nations. And I think all of our panelists spoke about the different countries with their different use cases. But I would like to touch on small nations like even Israel. They are focusing a lot on AI, and they are, saying that they would be the next military superpowers because that's the amount of investment that they've done. Russia, though it does not have a lot of research and other capabilities, but it's really investing a lot on, again, military superpower. And, they are infamous for their espionage and for the cyber threats. So those are the kind of focus in military as well that we are seeing. And even smaller countries like Thailand, like Singapore, who are investing in human capital in healthcare, that is an area, which really surprises me when I read about the Thailand 4.0, and they said that they are even using AI in tracking the fish boat so that they could stop the illegal fishing. So, the use cases are so vast, but I think, each nation to its own, there is going to be a widespread landscape of AI. So I'll leave it at that.
No, thanks, Anshuma. I think it's very interesting, the point to talk about the impact of COVID and how the issues about a single sourcing supply chain and the vulnerabilities that COVID has exposed are actually causing the nations to kind of claw back on their supply chains and build fabrication back into the home countries, or US probably using its market power to also look at considering how can it mitigate the risks of any further pandemic, which actually brings me to the second question. And I want to also talk about the whole thing, as I call as the cognitive divide, which is like different countries are probably having different access to that, even though Sundar's point of view is that technology is like sunshine, so it's available all the time. But then in terms of fabrication, as you said, Anshuma, that the increasing trend is that we are seeing it. When I was looking at the educational trend, I saw the same thing, that 86% of the students who are pursuing PhD in the US are actually international students, and most of them are staying back actually. So definitely some countries are making it very open. I was looking at Germany, which is inviting AI researchers, for example. So some countries are absolutely very talent magnets, and they are really calling the talent to do that. And when it comes to the whole, when we look at the national strategy, again, looking at the Stanford AI Index, 32 countries have published their AI strategies, and 22 are actually developing. And of course, China is ruled by the Beijing AI principles, as some of the panelists talked about. India, Niti Aayog has talked about economic growth, social inclusion, ethics, bias, and privacy. So my question to all the fellow panelists by rotation will be, what should India be doing really to build a stronger AI and leapfrog, hopefully in the fourth industrial revolution, unlike in the past where we were lagging significantly because of lack of access to capital and other history? Here we have an opportunity, as Sundar says, technology is a given to everybody there. What do you think should really be the priority from an industry or corporate or academia or policy? Anything that you feel might really have the biggest bang for the buck there? I would like to start with you, Anshuma, this time, so that we can go in reverse order, please.
Sure. Yeah. So I think, TV, for India, from my point of view, it is the nationalization of AI, which is really the PNP that we saw in the last session. The public and the private sectors really coming together, because that is the way that, we can harness the force of all the stakeholders together. And from the skill point of view, I think we are already having an edge, as you shared all the statistics. So, the nationalization piece is primarily one part which I think is going to make a significant change. The other thing I feel that we definitely have to do a little more on the privacy front. Though, privacy is taken as one of the biggest obstacles, but I feel that is very important, and India has to work a little more on that space so that we are able to protect the sovereignty of our data. So I would say these are the two things that from my end, India should be focusing on.
So I have one follow-up question on this, Anshuma. Given that historically we have not been strong as a nation in the chip manufacturing, or even chip design has been a smaller part of the entire IT sort of a value chain there. And the fact that you talked about some of the specialized chip manufacturing is going into more industrialized nations, do you think continued disaccess to chip fabrication and investment in semiconductors could actually be the headwinds for us in the long run? Or do you think that everything else equal may not be that big of a thing when it comes to adoption of AI for India?
Yeah, I think the adoption portion of it might not be really dependent upon the chip manufacturing piece of it. We can definitely be way ahead, because there are not a lot of manufacturing sites even across the globe. If you see, it's largely China or US and a little bit in the Asia. Maybe Singapore is one of them. But the adoption should not be hindered because of the chip manufacturing. But definitely it does give an advantage to wherever it is happening, or the nations that are, going forth with the manufacturing piece of it.
Makes sense. No, thanks for sharing. So Sundar, I want to come back to you and really, since you said technology is quite is not a differentiator. If research and innovation is really the thing that I picked away from yours, but correct me if you think that is not the most accurate depiction. How in your view we can improve things like patent filings, or things like industry academia collaboration, or things like patents and other things? Any thoughts you would like to share on this?
Absolutely, yes. So I'd like to, the topmost point which I always have found lacking in us, in India, is this. There is no collaboration happening between the big efforts that are happening from the state governments and from the central government. The central government, I mean, the bodies like Niti Aayog, National Supercomputing Mission, and all, they are like very doing extraordinarily good job, trying to do extraordinarily good job. There's a clear vision on what needs to be done, and there is a lot of work happening there. And then in silos, each state government is trying to prove how good they are, how better they are when compared to somebody else, and trying to do their own stuff. This is a major disconnect, is what I have always felt. It is just not that I feel that way. I have experienced it also through some work that which I have been doing. And this needs to be addressed on a very urgent basis. There has to be a central AI body which collaborates with every state government's efforts, and of course with the National Supercomputing Mission and the efforts of Niti Aayog, and bring a collaborative approach where each one of these bodies, namely the central body and the multiple state bodies, complement each other's efforts and drive towards an adoption, unified AI adoption, resulting in an AI nation called India. That is something that is really needed. The second one, particularly, looking at it from academia perspective, I have been a bit intrigued by seeing advertisements for BTech in data sciences, BTech in artificial intelligence, BTech in thankfully there is no BTech in deep learning. I mean, I'm not able to understand if that is the right approach. See, these are all tools, these are all methodologies to do something. I mean, I can understand a BTech in computer science, but I mean, do we really need to go that deeper? Are we somewhere missing the basics? Are we sort of not teaching the child to hold the pencil first and start writing, but instead are we asking the child to start typing on a keyboard? Is that the right way to do it? Typing on the keyboard is just a methodology of writing things. But maybe the child needs to understand the syntax and the semantics of language first, start writing things and understand the language, the grammatical part of it, and then he can write or he can type or he can dictate into a microphone. All those things are fine. Do we really need that? That is something which really has intrigued me, and I always left wondering that, hey, we have always been complaining that the patterns are not good in India, the basic research is not happening in India. But if we are opening up such courses which are meant to teach the kids about the tools rather than the technology itself, is that the right approach? Has always been mentioned.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very interesting thought process on there, and I've always seen that. I think we Indians going a little bit of an introspective, hard look at that is like very certification hungry, and I won't be surprised if we see a BTech, an ad for BTech in quantum computing with 5 years experience already there. So because of I'm just using my license for poetic exaggeration to say that. But let me go back to Jayati now. You talked about the wide canvas that you painted across nations there. In your view, do you think that India, with the strengths that it has in terms of the adoption that Sundar talked about, and the fact that the computing is ubiquitous thanks to cloud and other computing environments that, for example, AWS and other companies or Google and other ones have made available there, do you think that would be a good way for us to double down on that? Or do you think we should really take a step back and look at some of the chinks in the armor and really say, hey, we need to really fix the fundamentals first and then kind of go and take the next shot at it? What's your view, Jayati?
Sure. So there is, if you ask me, there is a little bit of a cognitive divide, right? And if you ask me, yes, access to technology is all pervasive, but I think the divide is on the basis of what is available, what is the internet strength, right? What is the broadband capability, what is your compute power capability, what is my penetration of laptops, do I have access to GPUs, right? What are my regulatory barriers? So this divide will sort of be there. But one thing that you're talking about, which is the softer aspects of it, right? And is a problem that is a pervasive problem for all nations, including India, that I would like to address, is bias in, bias out, right? And these fundamental questions that sort of AI sort of helps us answer. For example, at some point of time, LinkedIn's search algorithms made it easier for prospective male employees than female ones, right? Tools that threaten today privacy, suppress freedom, right? So while technology can enable all of this, but we should use it to make sure that we are using the data to reduce our bias, to create a more heterogeneous workforce. How does AI or technology aid us to making better decisions, right? To deal with problems that we have with respect to economy, clean growth, future mobility, as well as the needs of the society. So I think it's a combination of both. It can't be just technology solving for it. What are we solving is also an important aspect. And I think it can really aid us in terms of, the where we are today. I think our parents or our grandparents never had information at the tip of their fingers. So I think we should use it as to solve our problems or to be more inclusive. I think that's how I'd sort of conclude it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very fair point to talk about, and there has been so much of debate on the systematic bias that we see in the data. For example, on ethical AI or gender bias that we are seeing, or the racial bias that we are seeing. Some companies have been in the news in the last 1 year because of that, and I think it's something that we have to all think about and work together on that. And with that, the last question I have, Ranjani, for you is really from your viewpoint, what would be your response, especially given the fact that the countries seem to be fortifying their data access now with the GDPR and the other regulations, and every country coming there. Do you see that data is going to really, the strength is going to become the weakness in the face of the fortification, that we are going to see the cognitive divide deepening for the countries which do not have access to the data, or their population demography may not give them that liberty? Are there any thoughts that you would like to share on that?
Yeah, right. I'll try to keep this short, right? I think the absence of a plan is also a plan, right? It is actually a recipe for chaos. So absence of frameworks doesn't make us work faster. It's probably going to create more chaos. So if there's like one thing, right, which is foundational, which the government should focus on, is in creating data governance and regulation frameworks. And can you actually imagine the quantum of value which will be unlocked, right, if we were to have, say, defined standards, secure APIs, open source data, which can be used for large community impact projects, right? So I think it's absolutely critical to have that. Yes, there is a bunch of, there is GDPR, there's PCPD. All of this is paramount importance for getting us to execution. I think some of the countries have made tremendous progress over years. Singapore recently launched this model AI governance framework, where they are working on having more responsible AI, right? And they have defined a couple of principles around how organizations can use AI to make more decision making more explainable, transparent, and fair. And also, at the end of the day, AI solutions should be human centric, right? And how can AI be used to amplify human capabilities and interests of human beings, and work in a complementary manner? So yes, absolutely, that I think is a foundational piece for us to move ahead, right? Absolutely critical.
Thanks,
TV, unfortunately, we didn't have enough time, but this panel was so good. We just kept going. But, in the interest of time and paucity, quickly, could we have those 10-second conclusions from every panel member, please?
Sure, let's go ahead and do that. I understand, Riyaz. So, Ranjani, why don't you, what's your summary? What do you see ahead? If you had a crystal ball, what would the world look like to you?
Yeah, I think it's great times to be alive, right? We think linear when we think about future, but I definitely think the future is highly exponential. And this is going to be driven by exponential technology, AI, blockchain, augmented reality, virtual reality. Think about how all of that could interweave together, right? It's going to solve for like really crazy ideas and disrupt industries absolutely in terms of, say, car ownership or healthcare and fintech. So I think it's absolutely a great time to be alive and in working in this space.
Thanks, Ranjani. Jayati, please.
Yeah, I think the possibilities are immense, right? Today, someone's got the space, tomorrow, I don't know where, right? So I think at this point of time, where we're going to be 15, 20 years, the pace is immense. I don't know how we will sort of be in the next 10 to 20 years, but I am sort of looking forward, and I'm glad that I'm in this era and working in this field. So yeah, so I think it's going to be phenomenal.
Thanks. Sundar, your views, please.
In order to flourish as a professional, as a nation, as a society, all we have to do is identify our strengths where we are doing good, either as a professional or as a nation, and just tag on to it and ensure that that is tapped to its fullest extent. I mean, there will be a lag in terms of adoption of technology, in terms of whatever we have been doing. That has been there for every technology, not only for AI, for everything, for cell phones, for computers, everything. So all we have to do is ensure that we understand what our strengths are and tag on to that and ensure that we really tap onto them.
Thank you. And finally, Anshuma.
Yeah, now that all the panelists have spoken about all the wonderful things that are going to happen, and myself coming from the cybersecurity area, I would say that, let's ensure that not everybody falls into the AI arms race. And, we build on a beautiful world, which is not looking towards cyber colonialism. That is something where the developed nations might be taking an advantage of, the underdeveloped nations. Therefore, data privacy, the right kind of structure, and those kind of collaborations across nations, not just the public and private sectors, but all the nations coming together and making it a much more positive AI-led world. So that's what I would see it as.
Thanks, Anshuma. I don't think we could have gotten a better way to finish it. And the only thing I would add is that as the AI guru Andrew Ng says that AI is the new electricity, the only thing I would hope on behalf of this panel is that it will also be as trusted as the electricity in our houses, because you don't have to worry about when you switch on the fan that you're going to get a electric voltage shock there. I hope, and we all believe that we are going to be a part of that. So thank you. With that, it's been awesome talking to all my fellow panelists here, Anshuma, Sundar, Jayati, and Ranjani, and thanks once again. And I'll hand it over back to you, Riaz. And sorry, we took a little more time, but it was going in the flow, and I didn't want to disturb that. Thank you.
Yeah, same here. I just didn't want to stop you all because that was so nice to have a diversified panel adding such great value. And the way Anshuma finished it as well, it was so fantastic. Okay, so thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen.